Well, it's my pleasure tonight to introduce our three guests. The last number of years when I meet with some of the nursing students to think about Christian reflection within the field of nursing, I've been using a book that's entitled Called to Care, A Christian Worldview of Nursing. And I have really appreciated this book. And so when we were doing Feast and Faith online this year, and we realized that we weren't necessarily going to be having guests in person, but that we would be doing video conversations, I reached out to see if I could get in contact with an author of this book to have a conversation with them. And I was introduced to Judith Shelly, one of the authors of this book, and she quickly put together not only the other author of the book we had been reading, Arlene Miller, but I was informed that a new edition of this book was coming out in which Kim Fenstermacher was also joining as a third author of this book. And so it's my pleasure to have all three of these women with us tonight to discuss some of the content of this book and to think about nursing and what it means to care for God's people. So between the three of them, in talking with them this weekend, I realized they have over 100 years of nursing experience.
Well,
and I think that's marvelous because, you know, within that context, I mean, there's so many stories, but I'm going to let them tell a little bit about themselves as we get into it, because I think as we talk about the book, you'll hear more of their introduction through some of that. But just quickly, Judith Shelly had been working for InterVarsity for many years and had very much gotten involved in thinking about what it means to do nursing and to help other people think about what it means to do nursing from a Christian perspective, and was introduced to Arlene along the way, and they've co-authored this project for quite some years, and Arlene was teaching at Messiah College, and Kim Fenstermacher also teaches at Messiah now. And so it's great to see how this conversation is carrying on, and that gives great encouragement to think about how this will continue to have these types of leaders helping us to think about what it means to care for God's people from a Christian perspective. So welcome to all three of you. Thank you for being here. I'm going to start with the first question because I think it gets us into each of you being able to introduce yourself. And that is to discuss, you know, like, what's the story behind this book? Why did you write Called to Care? We'll begin there because that's going to be Judith's and Arlene's story. And then we can move into how Kim came into the project along the way.
okay. Yeah, actually, it started when I was a nursing student. I was a junior student, and I was assigned to a woman a patient who was just a real mess. I mean, the staff hated her because she was always on the call button. And I think that's why I got her as a patient. And at that time, I was a junior nursing student, and we would have one patient all day long for 8 hours. I know clinical is a little bit shorter now, but anyhow, she just drove me nuts. And finally she said, "Nurse, are you a Christian?" And I said, "Oh, yes." And she said, "Well, then you pray for me." And I said, "Oh, I will. As soon as I get back to the dorm, I will pray for you." She said, "Nope, you pray now, here, out loud." And I could see my instructor's size 10 white shoes under the curtain. And I knew I was not supposed to talk about religion with patients. But I decided that this was a request I could not deny. So I prayed for her. And afterwards, the instructor came to me and she said, "Miss Allen, what you did was not very professional, but it was appropriate." And the other thing that came from that encounter was that patient was a different person after I prayed for her. She finally signed her operative permit, which she had been refusing to do. She relaxed. She went through surgery and came out just fine. And even when I wasn't on the floor, she was easier to get along with the rest of the staff. And I realized I was onto something, that maybe we should do more of this. So I asked my instructor if I could write my term paper on the use of prayer in patient care. And she said, sure, if you can find at least 3 articles from a nursing journal in the last 2 years to document your opinions with. So I went dancing to the library and there was nothing. And at that point, I vowed that there would be nursing literature on spiritual care and Christian nursing. And I've written 21 books now. Call to Care is one of the last ones. I've written a couple since then. So Arlene, why don't you take over?
Well, I don't know. I'll just give you a little bit of, I went to a 3-year nursing school. I did it the old fashioned way because I'm pretty old. so I went to a 3-year nursing school and worked for quite a few years in visiting nurse work. We're going into people's home. I lived in Canton, Ohio, and it was a manufacturing steel town, and we had people from all over the world. Eastern Europeans, Jews, people from Jamaica. I mean, it was just a hodgepodge, and I loved it. I just loved that kind of interaction. I learned to speak a little Greek. I had so many Greek patients, and I learned how to speak a little Greek. Can't do it anymore. But anyway, I did that for a while, and then I went back to school and finished a bachelor's degree, and then eventually went to School of Public Health and University of Minnesota for a master's degree. And after that, I went to Zambia in the early 70s. 71 actually is when I started, January, and to teach a nursing program at a mission school. It was a pretty basic, it was more like a practical nurse program here, a 3-year program. And I learned a lot about different worldviews. I grew up in a Christian home, and but I somehow associated the world of the spirit was sort of tied to church in my mind. That's not quite true. I mean, I knew how to pray and so on. But the Zambians had just a clear different worldview. They're very aware of the world of the spirit. And I appreciated that. But some of that, a lot of that was good, and some of it was not so good. And so then when I came home and started teaching at Kent State University at a nursing school, nursing had changed quite a bit. And there were nursing theories that really distressed me a lot. I don't know if you use the term New Age. It isn't as popular as it used to be, but it was very popular then. And nurses were calling themselves shamans and and they were not particularly, they weren't trying to help people spiritually as Christians. It was just anything. And some of that really distressed me. In fact, when I was getting ready to teach, I worked one summer. I hadn't been in a hospital for a while. So I worked for a summer at a hospital in Cleveland, in a medical surgical unit. I was fascinated to meet a nurse who called herself a witch. She was a wonderful person. I loved her. I just said, well, what do you do? Well, we didn't have time to do a lot of talking, but all of these theories and these new ideas were really distressing me. And I learned to know Judy through Nurses Christian Fellowship. I was active in that. And one summer, she was at the same camp I was. And I knew she wrote. I knew Judy was a writer. And I said, Judy, we have to have a book on a Christian worldview for nursing. All of this weird stuff that was going around really distressed me. So that's how the book got started. I guess that's enough to. I was teaching when I was teaching at Kent. I taught an introductory course, and I had read James Sire's book, The Universe Next Door, and I used his framework to teach about different worldviews. I could do that in a state. It was a state university, but I could do that. So that's where I got this idea of using this framework to how do you answer these questions from a Christian perspective. So enough said.
Then it came. We've had 2 editions of Call to Care, and the one that Sid held up is the 2nd edition. And I got a phone call from University Press about a year and a half ago saying, it's been 20 years since the 2nd edition. We really need a 3rd edition. And I said, well, Arlene and I are both retired. I really don't know that much about nursing anymore. And I said, maybe if we can get a good 3rd author who's active in today's nursing, then we can write this 3rd edition. And that was Kim. So Kim, why don't you talk about yourself?
Well, thank you. I apologize. I'm battling the setting sun here in Pennsylvania where I live, and I keep moving, trying to stay out of the bright sun. Well, it's just a pleasure to be with all of you, and to get to know you a little bit this evening as we talk about the book. I was delighted to be introduced to Judy and Arlene, and they have fast become dear friends and sisters in the Lord as we've worked on this book. So my background is I've been a nurse since 1982. I graduated with my bachelor's degree from Boston University, started working in women's health and neonatal intensive care. And after many years at the bedside, I decided to go back to school because I wanted to teach. And so I got my master's and then eventually my PhD in nursing. And so the perspective I bring to the book is a contemporary look at some of the case studies and making sure that, they were written with the current clinical types of things that we're doing now, but also kind of envisioning the future of nursing. And at the last part of the book in chapter 15, we talk a lot about what's on the horizon for the profession of nursing.
Oops.
She froze.
As is with Zoom
And
and the
I've been
internet.
wondering.
There we go. She's back.
I'm back.
There for a while.
Did I freeze?
You did.
Yeah.
Here, okay, so what I said was we finished the book edits in February of 2020, and then we all know what happened in March. And I have often wondered how the perspective of the book might have changed, if we were living through COVID when we wrote it. But so anyway, right now I serve as Assistant Dean of Nursing at Messiah University. It's a small nursing department. We have about 200 students, undergrads, and then about 40 grad students. Small department, but I love what I do, and I love pouring into students' lives. I love being just a little part in the journey for students as they, are on their journey to become a registered nurse, a professional nurse. And I think the beauty of this book, from my perspective, and we use it at Messiah, is it that it teaches students how to think about the issues from the profession of nursing through a Christian lens. Like, for instance, what is the meaning of suffering? What does it mean to care? And those are some of the things we're going to talk about tonight, and I'm excited to do that. So I'm I guess the young kid on the block, but I'm not really that young. You can do the math. I graduated from college in 1982. But I do think, my perspective as an educator and as a clinician has been, a valued perspective. And I was delighted. It was a God thing. The Lord put us together, and he's been directing that all along. So it's been a blessing. Thanks for the invitation to be here.
So in reading your book, I think you're right, Kim, in that it helps students to begin to think about, how does caring for an individual fit into something larger than just being a job that you do. And it strikes me that one of the things that you do really well in the book is push an Old Testament concept of shalom. And it comes up in a couple of different chapters. And some of us have read the book, but not everybody has. So I'm just wondering if you could tell us a little bit about how shalom shapes your vision of nursing.
Okay. Shalom is such a wonderful, comprehensive concept. And it's usually just translated as peace, but it's so much more than the absence of war or conflict. It incorporates wholeness, wellness, justice, community, and it's all centered in God. And I think that's what gives us a focus for health that is much broader than just the absence of disease. It's working with the whole person, the family, the community, and looking at all of those needs and all of those relationships, so that, and that's what nursing has involved right from its inception. But I think especially in today's time when the bottom line is so important, it gets lost and people become objects with a checkoff list. And we need to be real careful that we're caring for the whole person and doing it from a God-centered perspective.
Yeah, I mean, you speak of the getting into we got to be careful about treating people simply as the bottom line, or as treat them for the illness that they're dealing with instead of them as a person. And again, that's a concept in your book that you dwell on when you begin to talk about the image of God and what it means to walk into a hospital room or into a space with a student and be able to recognize that the person in front of you is not just an illness to be cured, but they're a person that has been created. And that perspective seems to change how you do it. I'm wondering if you all can maybe share a story or an instance where that type of perspective really made a difference, where walking into a room and you were meeting with somebody, that it wasn't just about an illness you were dealing with, but it was about an image bearer of God that you were meeting.
So I tell my emergency room story. Well, when I was teaching at Messiah, I had students in the emergency room. I'm not an emergency room kind of person, but it was a great place for doing different procedures and things. When the big stuff came in, I could stand back and I could help students to see what was going on. They were not ready themselves to be part of that. But oftentimes, and I was in the evening and working in a city ER in the evening, you got all kinds of people. Some of them were really lovely. You could just put your arms around them and want to hug them and encourage them. But some of them, especially when they were hauled in because they were intoxicated or they had been in a fight. And one time I remember a gentleman, I'll call him that. He came in, he was actually hypothermic. He was unconscious, actually. He had had a little too much to drink, quite a lot more, and fell into the river. The hospital that I was at was right along the Susquehanna River. And somehow he got himself into the river. And they hauled him out and he was a mess. And so you can't warm people up right away. You have to, they put these blankets on them, those, I forget what you call them, those shiny things, and put them under lights and let them warm up gradually. And as he warmed up, some of his behavior was, well, he was just plain drunk. And his speech was not nice, and he didn't smell very good. But these are the times that I have to remember this person, my master, my God, created this human being. And sure, he really messed up big time. But I need to treat this person with respect. Sometimes you have to be firm. I mean, sometimes you have to be. But I need to treat the person with respect and remember that he's a creature made in God's image. And those are the sort of off the edge kinds of stories. So maybe Judy and Kim have some other ones. But those are the times that I thought about that right away. Yeah.
I can go next. Will I go? So I mentioned that I spent the majority of my clinical career in the neonatal intensive care unit. I don't know if you're familiar with those kinds of units in the hospital where we care for premature babies. And over the past, I'd say maybe, well, like it's always been a problem, but I think it's been an increasing problem over the past decade or so. To have heroin addicted mothers deliver babies, and then those babies are cared for in the neonatal intensive care unit because oftentimes it's a premature birth or the baby is having withdrawal symptoms from the opioid. And it is easy for some nurses to cast a lot of judgment on the mothers. And I think that's where the Christian nurse perspective is so important, because we don't always know, we almost never know really, why someone does what they do or the backstory of what their life has been like. And I think as a Christian nurse, particularly in a situation where the mother might have some guilt, is trying to get a fresh start, we can come alongside with a non-judgmental spirit, caring heart, show love, show respect, show kindness, and in so doing, be the hands and feet of Christ. And I think that's been my approach to all my patients, no matter, but particularly in situations where other nurses might, I don't mean intentionally shun a patient, because I don't think any professional nurse would do that, but maybe have a little chip, about someone's behavior or their choices, their life choices. And I think that's where we really need to be intentional about our practice and about our care, so that people will be able to see God's love through our care that we give. I'll turn it over to Judy.
I think one of the most beautiful examples that I could give is when I led a mission trip to Nigeria, and we traveled with a group of Christian nurses from Nurses Christian Fellowship in Nigeria, I asked them, just show us your best practices. And we weren't there to fix things, to change things, just to learn from them. And so they took us to a center that they had established for AIDS patients. And at that time, the AIDS crisis was just rampant in Africa. The medications were beginning to come out to treat AIDS. So they got a grant to set up this center where they could distribute the medications, but they also provided Bible studies and social groups that they could just get together and be with friends who accepted them, because most of their friends were rejecting them. So it was just a beautiful picture of going out and reaching people who had been ostracized and bringing them in and loving them. And I think that just, to me, spoke volumes.
You telling that story, Judy, just reminds me of my own time in Africa. And I was struck by the space that I was working in, that there was a Christian clinic that was dealing with AIDS patients, and seeing the lineups of people coming for their medications. And this was in the heart of some of those troubled times, but recognizing how in the midst of this space that the Christian church was bearing witness to how they were caring for people who many others simply wanted to judge on some level. And you know, that fits even with the same thing that Kim was talking about. What does it mean to come before people and truly appreciate them and recognize that we have something to do regardless of what the larger story is? We're part of God's story, therefore we care. So yeah, thank you for your stories. Those are all good. I'm trying to think of which question I want to go to next, but I want to maybe pick up on something that Judy began with when she talked about her initial experience that caused her to read the book, in which she talked about praying with a patient in a room and knowing that she wasn't supposed to do that. And yet in the moment, that's what she did anyways. And that becomes a hot topic. And it can even be a hot topic in the university and in other places, this idea that you leave your religious faith at the door and you can't bring that into a situation you're in. And I don't see how people can do that, because people who have religious faith, it's a part of who they are. It's impossible to just... This concept is now coming into the mainstream in terms of the concept of spirituality, that it's starting to be embraced a little bit, that you want to bring spirituality and that people have a spiritual dimension, though it's very vague in terms of how that's talked about. I'm wondering if any of you have any thought about how Christians can practice spiritual care in our contemporary environment, where it's still rather touchy as to how we do that.
Interestingly, I've prayed with patients from the time I graduated on, and I never had a complaint from anybody. And it was interesting, when I was in seminary, I was doing my field work in the same hospital where I was working on weekends as a nurse. And the chaplain handed me the guidelines, and nobody was allowed to pray with patients except chaplains. And I said, I've been praying with patients all along. And he said, oh, that's okay. That's you're doing it appropriately. It's the Jehovah's Witnesses. We want to have some kind of something on paper saying they can't do it. And I think that the key word was, you're doing it appropriately. And that's really what, you know, when we meet spiritual needs, we do it appropriately. We do it to actually meet a need that's been either expressed by the patient or demonstrated by the patient by their actions. You pick up cues, you intervene appropriately. You don't go in and grab them by the back of the neck and give them the whole gospel in a nutshell. You pick up cues. If they're yeah, I had one patient who just kept saying he was afraid of going to hell. And I said, can you tell me more about that? And he said, oh, I've just done all these terrible things, da, 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 da. And he said, I don't trust any priest to come near me. And so I said, well, you just confessed all this to me. I said, why don't we just pray and tell God about it and be done with it? And I said, then you're okay. And so we did. And he was just so relieved. But you know, it was just things like that was one of the more dramatic ones. But basically, it's listening to them, picking up what they're saying, picking up cues in the room. They're clutching a rosary or things that indicate that faith is important to them. Generally, to offer to pray with them just changes everything, because it makes them feel comfortable in a very strange environment.
Kim or Arlene, either of you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I think I think also, I agree with Judy, paying attention and listening, I think. I think, first of all, in regards to praying, nobody can stop you praying, even if you're not praying out loud. So, you know, you can be praying about this person and asking God to guide you and help you. And one of the stories I read, and I used to do this myself, was a physician who was working in a very busy city hospital in Atlanta, Georgia. She was in an outpatient department, and there were, I don't know, way too many patients to see, way too many. So once you got in there, you just had to keep going. But one of the things she did before she started was to say, Lord, help me to hear you if there's somebody I need to pay special attention to. Just help me to be aware when you're nudging me. And then otherwise, I'll get on with business, which is what she did. But from time to time, as she was working with somebody, she could sense different things or felt like she should pray for them or ask them more questions or whatever. So I think that approach, and I've often done that myself, just praying, help me to know, just bump me when I need to pay special attention. I think the other thing is when you know a little bit about the culture of your patient. And now this is an old story, and I don't know if it would work today so much, but many African Americans are believers. The older people especially, they went to the church, you knew that. And I remember having one gentleman, this is when I had come back from Zambia, and he was in the hospital. I think he had a stroke. I can't remember, but I think so. And his wife was in the same hospital down on another unit. I think she was dying of cancer. She had been in first, and then he had this stroke and came in. And I was with students at that time. But after the students left, I went back into his room, and I knew, I could tell, he would hardly talk when we were in the room before. So I said to him, I said, you know, when I have to hang on to something and I'm feeling really desperate, the only hook I know to hang on to is God. And that man got hold of my hand and squeezed it so hard, he'd hardly let go. And I knew that I had touched something. So the next time I went back with students, by this time, and I don't know that it was me, but maybe whatever the progress, but the next time I went back a day or so later, he was able to sit up and talk and respond. So I knew that. I grew up around African Americans. I knew much about their culture, and I knew that this would. Another time, this is when I was in the emergency room. They would bring in young guys with sexually transmitted diseases. And I knew enough about them that young men respect their grandmothers. I knew that. So I'd say, you know, what would your grandma say about this? And they would laugh, but I knew I had pushed a button. You know, guy, just don't do this. I mean, you know, I couldn't. And then we went on and did all the penicillin and all the stuff we needed to do. But I think a lot of it is learning to know the culture of your patients. And that you can do that if you work in the same place. Sometimes you have to work so fast and move around. That's hard. But anyway, that's my experience.
I would just echo what Judy and Arlene said. I think the most important thing is to listen and to watch for cues. And I think, you know, in addition to praying with patients, sometimes, just playing a favorite hymn, putting on
Mhm.
a spiritual program on TV for them or something to help them pass the time. Just being mindful of those things that can really help them and to give them some comfort, during a very vulnerable time.
Yeah, I think that concept of paying attention and taking the time, which you aren't always afforded in nursing these days, is an important concept, which may be a question I want to come back and pick up on. I want to pause. I have a few different avenues I'd love to go down, but I also want to be cognizant of the time and give students the opportunity to ask their questions and hear the types of things that they might be curious about your careers or about the book Called to Care. So I'm going to open it up to students who have questions. And if you have a question, just raise your hand in the participant box and I'll see it and I'll call your name. And we can discuss whatever it is that you want to discuss with our guests tonight. Any questions?
I don't know how to raise my hand, but I have a question.
Just go for it, Sarah.
Okay. Hello, I did read your book. It was a blessing and very enjoyable to talk about with Sid and other people, but I'm wondering if any of you have experience working in mental health, and if that is something you could tell me a little bit about. I've just started my clinical rotation at the Royal Ottawa. I've been enjoying it, so I'm kind of exploring it, but yeah, just wondering what you have to say if you have any experience there.
I personally do not have, just concentrated experience in mental health, Sarah. We do rotate our students through a mental health, course. But I would say that no matter the specialty that you choose for nursing, the mental health of your patients will be there front and center for you to have to know how to care for. Mm-hmm. So that is a concept, a type of nursing care that threads through any specialty, whether it's maternity and you're dealing with bereavement and loss and grief, whether it's a patient who's receiving a serious diagnosis and that causes maybe some depression, no matter, and Judy and Arlene can weigh in anytime. It is a really important part of delivering good nursing care. So it's good that you're having that discrete course in your program where you can learn a lot about it. I think there's a lot of undiagnosed mental health conditions, especially in the United States, particularly among college students. A lot of, I think, undiagnosed depression and anxiety. And so I think we just need to be attentive to those issues and the potential that maybe someone is dealing with an undiagnosed mental health issue, that might be causing, their behavior or their refusal to be treated for something, or, could be a myriad of reasons. But that's my 2 cents.
There's also some really good research about spiritual dimensions of mental health. Verna Carson, it's pretty old research at this point. And then Dr. Bill Wilson from Duke, and that's fairly old too, but it's good stuff. And it documents why spirituality is so important in mental health, and that actually patients do better if they're getting their spiritual needs met. They don't freak out and think they're God just because you mentioned the word. That spiritual, that's the spiritual aspect is part of being a whole person. Mm-hmm. And if you're not addressing that, you're not addressing mental health.
Yeah, that's like one of the main reasons I've been so attracted to it recently, is just because it's so directly applicable, and it's something that comes up and you have to talk about very directly when it comes to mental health, is their spiritual well-being. So it's cool.
Yeah, and I would also add, to always kind of just be the champion for the patient, their advocate, and help them to see there's such a stigma in the United States. I think we're getting better. I don't know what it's like in Canada, but there has been for a long time a stigma associated with mental health. But I think people are kind of getting over that. And I think particularly during the COVID pandemic and how we've all been locked down, and we've all experienced, some need for perhaps additional support, and so I think people are a little bit more open to reaching out. And I think what Judy said is absolutely true. They go hand in hand, like good spiritual care.
The only thing I would add to that is being there for the families of people who have mental health issues. I had a niece, bless her heart, she's in heaven now, and actually we're glad she's got a new home. But she had a lot of struggles, physical struggles. She had cerebral palsy. And then I don't know how old she was, probably in her 30s. She was diagnosed with as a bipolar. And my brother and his wife are what? They're 9 years younger than I am, so they're not young. And they tried and tried and tried they took care of her at home for a long time. And they even thought about what's going to happen when they can't take care of her. And looked for group homes. Now, let me add that she was a sincere Christian. She really loved the Lord, but she would, well, the bipolar is no fun to live with. Let me just say that. But my brother and sister-in-law, they kept her at home, and we all kept worrying and praying, what's going to happen to Carla? And we all think it's maybe God's mercy. She had an accidental fall. We've all been waiting for her to fall down the steps, but she didn't fall down the steps. She accidentally fell and bumped her side. She put on a brace that her mother didn't think she should try to use, but she did. And apparently this fall, she bumped her side against the stair post, and it must have done a lot more damage than what they knew. She complained of her side hurting, but it wasn't. But about a week later, she just got to the point she couldn't stand up, and she went to the hospital. They called the hospital. She went to the hospital, and eventually what happened was she had serious internal bleeding from this. And all to say that for many years, my sister-in-law and brother, and she had a sister and cousin and nieces and nephews, we all loved Carla, but she wasn't easy to live with. So I'm just saying, you need to be there for the families. It's not easy living with someone with those kinds of things. So anyway.
Yeah, I want to pick up on this because Kim, you mentioned the importance of advocating for your patients and including their spirituality. How does that look to advocate for spirituality when the person in the room doesn't have the same spirituality or the same categories that you use? What does it look like to advocate for someone's spirituality? As a Christian, how do you advocate for people's spirituality when they're asking for something that's quite different than your own faith?
Refer. That's what Jesus did when he allowed the rich young man to go away, and he wanted to put his faith in his riches, and Jesus just let him go. And I think that's what if somebody is wanting to follow some other spiritual track, you refer them to somebody who can help them. And if some of it's very weird, and that's sometimes hospitals get into trouble because people come in and start burning candles and chanting things. And when we were in Korea, they were telling us that some of the patients, when they were dying, the families would put pots of where they would burn paper. It's paper money, so that they'd have money in heaven. And that was a Christian hospital. And interestingly enough, they just decided that it was better for the mental health of the family and the patient to allow them to do this. But they had built a shed in the back of the hospital where people could go and burn their money instead of doing it under the bed. So there are times we just have to respect the person's choices.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think I think it depends on the kind of relationship you have with the person as well. Like, remember the story, Judy, of what was her name? We knew a nurse. Well, let me just say she was from India. She worked in India, and she was Christian. But of course, in India, you take care of people who are Muslims and Hindus and Jainists and a whole bunch of other stuff. But she had this, again, she was living the hands of Jesus in that environment and built these relationships of respect. And sometimes these, especially the Hindu, I remember one story, a Hindu man wanted her to pray, and they had special prayers that they prayed. She said, well, I can't pray those prayers, but is it okay if I pray to my God, to Jesus? Yeah, it was okay. So again, I think, it's your sensitivity and your relationship to the person.
Yeah.
She couldn't chant Hindu chants. She just couldn't do that to Shiva or to whoever else. But she could pray to Jesus, and with permission, the man said it was okay. And I think she's the very one. I'm getting my stories all mixed up, but I think this story was in the book. She was asked to go to a service for a Hindu person, and the priest, the family wanted her to come, and they wanted her to say something. So she just repeated. She repeated and prayed one of the Psalms. And she remembered seeing the priest, the Hindu priest, with tears coming in his eyes. So again, I just think it's how well you know people, the respect you show them, and again, agreeing I can't pray to some other God, but is it okay if I pray to mine? And sometimes they will let you do that. It's tricky. It is really tricky. And of course, let me just say that that's one of the things that was behind some of the issues that I was dealing with when we wrote this book, because there were all kinds of spiritualities coming in. And I think that's true today. One of the things that concerns me today, and Kim and I talked a lot about this, is mindfulness. Mindfulness and a kind of meditation, and that gets all mixed up with what do you mean by meditation and so on. But this business of just emptying your mind for long periods of time as a way to deal with stress, and actually it's being handled or advocated by many prestigious places. You can go on Mayo Clinic website and find guidelines for advocating mindfulness. And again, you have to define carefully what you mean, but so there's a lot of this kind of thing, and sorting through it is not easy, let me just say.
Well, that's the importance of understanding your own tradition too. When you get into the subject of mindfulness, there's a long Christian tradition of mindfulness.
That's right.
You need to understand your categories so that you can bring your categories of mindfulness into the conversation.
That's right.
Are there other questions from students? Kim.
Yeah, so you spoke a bit about why you wrote the book called To Care. So I was wondering if there was anything specifically that called you to nursing, and if there was any doubt about choosing your profession, and if so, how you were able to deal with that. Because currently I'm in nursing school, and it can definitely be overwhelming. So I was wondering if there's like any advice on how you dealt with those difficult situations.
I'll take this one, and then I'll turn it over to my peers. I was in your shoes, Kim. When I was a student, I was just telling the story today. I went to my first clinical course at the Veterans Hospital in downtown Boston on a med surg, like a neuro unit. And I took care of a brain injury patient. And I thought, what have I done? I hate this. I hate this. And so I went to my advisor. Everyone goes to their advisor, right? You have a good nursing advisor, I hope, at your school. And I had a conversation with her, and I said, I don't think I'm cut out for this. I don't really like it. And she said, hang in there, because there's a lot of different specialties in nursing. And she said, one of these things will make your heart sing. And when I got to pediatrics, it made my heart sing, and women's health and maternity. And I found my niche, and I loved it. And I would just say that if you believe that God has called you to be a nurse, and I believe that he had called me to be a nurse, that he will open doors for you, and he will put you in, give you opportunities to find your way. And you'll know it, right? You'll know it when you get to that unit and that type of patient care. You'll just feel like a fire in your belly that you have to do it, right? You'll just be so excited about it. And I see that same thing with my students. I see the light come on, in them. And as they're, what year are you in? Second, third, second? Oh yeah, you're just in the throes of it, right? Hang in. And here's my other piece of advice. This is a season, right? It's 4 years of your life. And then you're gonna go out and conquer the world, because as a nurse, in this day and age, you can do anything.
Yeah.
You can work at the bedside, you can be in administration, and you can be a leader in that regard. You can teach, you can go on for a graduate degree and be a nurse practitioner, a nurse anesthetist. I mean, there's just a million things you can do.
Yeah.
You can work part-time, full-time, I mean, anything. Inpatient, outpatient, any specialty. Yeah. I could give you my email, and if you ever need to chat, I will encourage you up, girl. I got your back.
I would love that. Thank you so much.
But yeah, just to reinforce that with what Kim has just said, when I was a senior in high school, I was very carefully outlining what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. And there were 3 things that I was really interested in: nursing, teaching, and being a director of Christian education. So I prayed about all those things, and it just seemed like nursing was it. But in the process, I have become a teacher, a writer, a campus minister. My graduate degrees are in religion. So, and it's been wonderful. So yeah, you can do anything, and I think quite why God called me into nursing was to work on this gap in the literature, which is now quite full of spiritual things, good and bad.
My story is boring. When I was a little kid, I wanted a nurse kit. I mean, I was 4 years old. I wanted a nurse kit for Christmas. I mean, it just was always. So I have kind of a boring story. Because I'm old, there were 3 things when I was young that most women did, at least in the culture I grew up in: a nurse, a teacher, or a secretary. And I didn't want to be a secretary. I knew that. I didn't want to be a teacher, but as it turned out, I'd become a teacher and a nurse. But anyway, it was just always there. So sorry. But you have a tougher time. I think women today, it's wonderful. You can do anything, but you have to make these decisions. I never had to make it. So Anyway.
I don't think you need to apologize for that, Arlene. I think it's a wonderful thing that some people have a clear direction. It makes for a good mix. Yeah. I am often struck by the fact that nursing was a profession where a lot of women in the 20th century, especially, were able to, well, even older. When you look at the history of nursing and Medicare, it's a place where women leaders were able to show up and have a profound influence on culture and society, because it was a permissible place for them to do so. So yeah. Other questions that students have? It's quiet.
Sure, I don't know how to raise my hand,
Just
but
go for it, Elise.
concerning coworkers, and I guess the environment you're in, because you're witnessing to the patients and you're caring for the patients, but how do you also care for your coworkers?
Good point. And interestingly, it just sort of comes naturally. I found when I would start caring for patients, like spiritually or something, that the other staff realized something was going on. And I remember one situation where I knew this gal was going through a struggle with her boyfriend and all sorts of stuff. And so one day she came to me and she said, that what you do with patients when they're upset and need somebody to pray with them, she says, could you do that with me? And it just came very naturally, that because you're being authentic with your patients and with your colleagues, they trust you and they'll come to you, and you don't have to force it. And I found prayer is the best evangelism tool in the world, because people don't want a lecture, but they sure do want God's help. And when you pray, that just creates a bond, and everything else opens up from there.
Jim, why don't you do this one?
I think that's really great advice, Judy. And I think I would just add to just be a listening ear. I think especially now, there's a lot of stress on the unit. Are you working now, Elise, on a nursing unit? Are you doing some?
I haven't gotten to clinicals yet.
Oh, okay. I know a lot of students, at least where I teach, a lot of our students get part-time jobs in the hospital. And, I had a student in class the other day, just last week. We were talking about taking care of COVID patients and the stress of that. And what I didn't know was that she was working as a nurse's aide on the weekends on a COVID unit.
Oh.
And she had been the person who, was tasked with taking the patients who had died to the morgue. And as we were talking about this in class, she just had a full-blown panic attack, full-blown, like meltdown. And what I realized was that she had not had a chance to process.
Yeah.
So I took her out, we did some deep breathing, I gave her some, water and calmed her down. And then I just let her talk. And for about 20-30 minutes, we sat in the faculty lounge, and she just shared her heart, how hard it was. And she felt better after that. And then I encouraged her to seek out her nurse manager and have some more conversation about how difficult that was. What you can't let things, build up. You have to take care of yourself so you can take care of other people. So I guess that would be my other piece of advice. You want to care for your coworkers, and you want to be a shining light, Christ's love to them, but you also have to make sure you're okay, because it's stressful. The nursing profession is stressful. And so, listening to other people, finding someone you can talk to and debrief with after difficult situations, even as a student, that will be really, really important for your, your future self-care. and then your ability to care for others.
Yeah, can we maybe say a little bit more about that, Kim or Judy or Arlene? Like, did you have people or things that you did to help let the air out of the balloon so that, you know, some of the things that you would have dealt with in the hospital or in rooms, I mean, it is a lot to take in. These are people's lives, and some of it is really heavy stuff. Did you have practices that you used to make sure you were not just bottling it up?
Wow. I mean, one thing I will say is that I think for me as a nurse educator, it starts in the classroom as we try to teach our students how to approach these things. And I've had some students in my office over the years in tears because they just don't know what to do with all the suffering that they're seeing in clinical. So I think that kind of wrestling with that in advance, kind of, and I don't know how the magic answer, but just kind of thinking through, you know, God's plan for life and his use of you as a person in the that vulnerable situation of taking care of patients and helping to put all that in perspective. But aside from that, I think it's also important to get into some good habits, you know, of getting enough sleep, having a healthy diet. I know I sound like everyone's mother, right? Chocolate is helpful. Taking walks, having a circle of friends who can understand, right? Nurses are a tightly knit bunch, and I still have nurse friends, you know, in what I call my circle of five, who I may not see very often, but when I do, we pick right up where we left off, you know, and they get it. They get me, you know, and so that's really helpful to have a close circle of people who understand what you do. And I would say also cultivating a daily time with the Lord. I love Sid's opening question, you know, have you made time to be still? That is something that I have cultivated. Is I use the U version on the Bible app. Do you guys have, you all have iPhones, I'm sure, but there's a Bible app called U version, and they have a daily Bible verse. And I start my day every day with that, and then I read a few chapters of the Bible. But it's a discipline that I do every single morning. I start the coffee pot, and then I open my Bible, and I don't miss it a day. And that is a habit that it holds me up. You know, it's a foundation for me. So that's also good.
I would just echo that. And the other thing that I found when I was in nursing school was we had an NCF, a Nurses Christian Fellowship group, which was a Bible study. And those were the friends that I still keep up with 50 some years later.
Right.
But yeah, those are the people that you can talk to.
Right.
You understand where you're coming from.
Right. I just say amen to all of that. I think I have one friend from NCF days. She's retired, but she's never stopped being a nurse. I mean, I could go. She calls me often and talks. And when we talk, it isn't just for 20 minutes. It's usually an hour or more. So I think, again, just being able to talk about, and then somebody asked about how to support your coworkers. Again, I think it's just listening to them and sometimes helping them out. There's an old adage, I don't know how true it is anymore. It used to be that nurses eat their young, meaning that the older nurses, when somebody new comes on, they can't quite do it right, or they can't quit it quite right. I just think if you're in a position where you can influence that and say, hey, give this person a chance, help them out. And helping each other out when you don't get your work done, maybe giving that extra help for people. There's just a lot of ways. But yeah, I agree. Just keeping in touch with the Lord, talking to your friends, and then take a break. It's okay to take a break. I mean, go on a vacation when you need to. So, okay.
Are there other questions that people have? listening to you talk and thinking in the caring profession, as Kim's talking about her group of 5, I'm thinking about my group of pastors that I do the same thing with. It's that they're my people, and they understand what the nuances like nobody else does. So it's probably true of most professions, but in caring profession, especially dealing with people. Questions? Christy.
Hi, so I had a question about, I'm on a unit right now where it's very palliative end of life. So death is something that everyone's constantly talking about and, you know, thinking about, even if no one's saying anything. You can just see in the patients that they're thinking about it, which is unfortunate, but inevitable, obviously. So I just had a question if either any of you had any experience in end of life care, and if so, any advice you would have on how to deal with it or coming at it from a Christian perspective.
Well, nursing in general is, you do a lot of end of life care, and it's hard. The main thing is that, you know, to be able to be upfront about it, to talk about it if you need somebody to talk to find another nurse or somebody that you can really trust, that you can talk to about your own feelings, but also to be able to talk with the patient about it, and that creating an environment where it's safe for them to talk about death, and they're not going to get you upset if they do, and that you don't have to push it, but just when they begin talking about it, just listen and encourage them to keep talking. So,
I would agree with that. Did you want to say something, Arlene?
Well, I was just thinking of one of the I don't know how helpful this is, but when I was working as a young nurse, I was doing visiting nurse work, and I visited an old Italian grandma. She was the matriarch of the Italian bakery in town. And I loved their stuff. Anyway, but she was dying with cancer. But they did not want grandma to know this. Oh no, oh no. So I could never openly talk with her about this, but I knew that she knew. I knew she knew. So, you know, that one was really hard for me because the family absolutely, no, you don't tell grandma. But now a lot of my stories are in home health because I did it for a long time. Another family, this was an African-American family, and this wasn't so long ago. I was working for a visiting nurse one summer while I was teaching at Messiah. And they had, grandma was dying, but they had moved all the furniture around in the whole downstairs and put the mother's bed in the living room, smack in the living room where it was, and all the equipment, everything that needed to be there. So it made kind of a messy place, but I was so impressed because this family, they knew she was dying, and they all gathered around. The pastor came to visit one day while I was there. Well, I guess I had a student with me then, because I remember she was a Cambodian student, but Christian. She was Christian. And we went to visit, and I was so impressed. Here was this family. They were Christian, and they had moved everything around in the house. And the daughter was looking after her mother. The son-in-law was okay with all this. And neighbors were coming in with food. And the pastor came to visit. It was just, I thought, you know, this is a holy place. So it's really hard, Christy, when you don't have that kind of support.
Yeah.
That's really hard. And the Italian family I was telling you about earlier, they didn't give grandma that support. And I felt that. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I remember the first time I saw a dead body. I remember very well. This again was in visiting nurse. They had called for us to come, but by the time I got there, the man was gone.
Mm.
So yeah, you know, I think about death as it's one of those things that the philosophers call edge experiences. You're on the edge. You can travel with this person so far, but when they get to the edge, you can't go with them anymore. I was so pleased when my own mother died. I prayed God let me be with her, and He was, and I stayed with her. It was quite a long time I stayed with her, but it got right up to the edge, and I would sing with her and prayed with her, and then I just sat there. And we didn't want any heroics, no heroics, no. She was 99, so no heroics. And when she died at 6 o'clock in the morning, on September the 30th, I remember saying to her, well, Mama, you did it right. You just didn't even go into the next month. You timed it right. So, but there's something holy. There's something holy about being with a person that's dying. And what happens, I think, in hospitals, when you're in this crunch and you're pushed and there's so much going on, that's when it's really, really hard, because I've seen nurses on television crying during this COVID business because they're the only one there. They have to show the patient to the family through a tablet or a phone, and they're the only one there holding their hand. Those are very hard. Those are hard.
Yeah.
That's when you need a lot of outside help and support. Yeah.
I think you've hit on something, Arlene. So, you know, I've actually been a bereavement researcher. My dissertation was in perinatal loss and bereavement. And since then, I have done some research in end of life with oncology nurses, and just finished a research study last year. Concurrently, while we were writing the book, I don't really know how I managed all that, but somehow I did. I did a grounded theory study. Those of you in nursing school, you might have a research course where you're looking at qualitative research methods, and that's what that was. And so we're getting ready to submit the publication to the Oncology Nursing Forum Journal. But it's a study on the experience of nurses discharging patients to hospice care at home. And so, you know, trying to meet the patients where they are, and if they want to die at home, trying to get them home so they can have a peaceful death at home. What we found is that when the patient and family disagree about things, that's when it becomes stressful.
Yeah.
When everybody is on the same page,
Yeah,
about the plan and their desires and the wishes, then it is a more peaceful experience. And you've probably seen that in practice, haven't you, Christy, on your unit? You've probably seen that when the physician refuses to, you know, meet the patient where they are, when the daughter or husband or wife or something refuses to go along with the patient's wishes, then it becomes, you know, kind of full of strife, and that's not what we want. And so, I think as a nurse, coming in and helping to keep the communication channels open, saying, well, let's hear from the patient. What does the patient want? Let's get the family on board. You never want to get to that point at end of life where the family hasn't had a chance to say what they want to say. So I think you want to also foster those opportunities for those conversations and do what you can in that regard. So yeah, you brought a great question. All these questions were really good.
yes.
Fun.
Yeah, it strikes me that it's 7:20 and we're on the tip of another great conversation we could jump into. You know, end of
Maybe
life
we can do it again.
Yeah, end of life care. And you're right. There's, you know, Arlene talked about there's something sacred about those moments. And that'd be my encouragement for nurses, is to recognize that you have the chance to be the presence of God in a holy time and space for people, that as people are dying, it's hard, but as a caregiver, it's also a privilege, because
Mhm.
God's offered you an opportunity
Yes.
to be
Yes.
present. And
Mhm.
it's sometimes not that you'd have to have words to say, but just being in the space
Yes.
and listening to people, and maybe sometimes advocating for a family's wishes because you're paying attention. It's such a sacred space. And if you are willing, in a hospital setting or a hospice setting, if you're willing to be a good listener, you will be afforded such wonderful moments where you hear stories of how God has been at work, even if God is not named in those moments, because just of how people reflect on life in those end of care moments. So that'd be my encouragement. It's an opportunity to enter into sacred space. So, it's 7:20, so I want to be respectful of people's time. We're going well over, and there's more. Unless there's a burning question from one of the students, is there a burning question you're really hoping to get in yet? I'm not hearing anybody jump in. Judy, Arlene, Kim, thank you so much for joining us tonight. It has been a pleasure to hear you tell stories and also share some of your wisdom in reflecting on what it means to care. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure,
Yes.
a lot of fun.
It's so fun to see students again. I love it. Kim
Which,
sees them all the time, but I live in a retirement village. I have my own little house. But, and once in a while we do things with Messiah students. They want to use us, you know, they interview us and all this, but it's lovely to see students again.
yeah, I could get on my my dream, which is a student residence that's mixed with the seniors residence as one.
There you go.
I always think that would be ideal, to create such a type of student residence.
Yeah.
Is it okay if I pass on your contacts to our nursing students if they want to follow up
I
on
would
something
love
that you
that.
talked
Oh,
about?
yes.
Sure,
You may.
I would love that.
Okay.
And you can correct, I don't know how I typed in Moeller. My name is Miller. I got the time mixed up. I thought it was 6:30, and then I'm doing it on. Anyway, it's Miller, not Moeller.
Yeah.
But there are Moellers around. I know some. So,
I would just wish you all a really blessed Easter,
Yes.
and you know, stay strong and
yes,
healthy.
yes.
And thank you so much for the opportunity to be here.
Yes. Thank you.